Sadakamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavamsa Shri Rupam Sakujatam Savana Raghunatham Vikram Sahivam Sadvaitam Savdutam Vijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam
Quickly do download it.
Giriraj Krishna Padam Sagana Joita Shri Vishakhanvitamscha Namah Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Namaste Saraswati Deve Nirvishesha Jayam Vishnupad Paramahansa Prajakacharya Stotra Sutta Sri Srimad Bhakti Vedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai. ISKCON founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jayam Vishnupad Paramahansa Pariprajakacharya Stotra Sutta Sri Srimad Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Prabhupada Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Prem se kaho Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinath Sham Kunda Radha Kundagiri Govardhan Ki Jai. Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai. Navadvip Dham Ki Jai. Jamuna Mai Ki Jai. Ganga Mai Ki Jai. Tulsi Devi Ki Jai. Bhakti Devi Ki Jai. Samveta Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. Nitai Gaur Premanande. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Bring the herbal water. So we are approaching Sri Rama Ekadasi, which is a very significant day because it was the day on which Srila Prabhupada completed his translation of Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita. And so I will discuss Sri Rama Ekadasi from that perspective. I'll just get the book on the screen. Okay. So again, Sri Rama Ekadasi is a very special day. It is the first Ekadasi in the month of Kartik, or Damodar, and it has special significance as the day on which Srila Prabhupada completed his translation of Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, the most important book on the life and precepts of Sri Krishna Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Every devotee should read it. Actually, every devotee should read every book of Srila Prabhupada's. Sri Ishopanishad, Bhagavad Gita as it is, the Nectar of Devotion, Srimad Bhagavatam, and Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita. Although Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita covers a wide range of topics, it is a very advanced book of study, and we shall read from the end of it. Jaya Jaya Sri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gora Bhaktavinda. All glories to Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. All glories to Lord Nityananda. All glories to Advaita Chandra. And all glories to all the devotees of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So on this date, Sri Rama Ekadasi, in 1974, I went up the stairs to Srila Prabhupada's quarters in the F block at the back of the Juhu property. It was usual for us to go every morning at 6 o'clock to accompany Srila Prabhupada for his walk on Juhu Beach. But this time we were surprised to find that the door was locked. In fact, both doors to his quarters and to his staff's quarters were locked. And we could not understand why. We knocked, and eventually Srila Prabhupada's secretary, Harikesh Das, opened the staff's door and told us that Srila Prabhupada had just completed his translation of Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, that he had written the most beautiful glorification of his Guru Maharaj at the end, that he was in a very jubilant mood, and that he said we should celebrate by having a feast. So now we shall read Srila Prabhupada's concluding words to Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita. Concluding words. Today, Sunday, November 10th, 1974, corresponding to the 10th of Kartik, Chaitanya era 488, the 11th day of the dark fortnight, the Rama Ekadasi. We have now finished the English translation of Sri Krishna Das Kaviraj Goswami's Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita. In accordance with the authorized order of His Divine Grace, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Goswami Maharaj, my beloved eternal spiritual master, guide, and friend. Although, according to material vision, His Divine Grace, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada passed away from this material world on the last day of December, 1936, I still consider His Divine Grace to be always present with me by His Vani, His words. There are two ways of association, by Vani and by Vapu. Vani means words and Vapu means physical presence. Physical presence is sometimes appreciable and sometimes not. But Vani continues to exist eternally. Therefore, we must take advantage of the Vani, not the physical presence. The Bhagavad Gita, for example, is the Vani of Lord Krishna. Although Krishna was personally present 5,000 years ago and is no longer physically present from the materialistic point of view, the Bhagavad Gita continues. So Srila Prabhupada sets the theme for his concluding words in the very first sentence by saying that he has completed his translation of Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita in accordance with the authorized order of His Divine Grace, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj. The order, the instruction, the words, the Vani, that's the important point. Although Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur had passed away on the last day of December in 1936, Srila Prabhupada was still connected with him by serving his instructions. Almost 40 years after his Guru Maharaj disappeared, our Srila Prabhupada was pleased to offer him his translation of Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita. In other words, his relationship with his spiritual master was not diminished by the passage of time, because the association of Vani continues eternally. In Srila Prabhupada's dedication to his translation of Srimad Bhagavatam, he wrote, "To my eternal spiritual master, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj, he lives eternally by his divine instructions, and the follower lives with him." We never need to feel bereft of the association of the spiritual master or the parampara, because their association is always available through their words, Vani. And as Srila Prabhupada wrote, we must take advantage of the Vani. For example, Srila Prabhupada's Vani is available in his books. So we have to take advantage of his books. If we don't read his books, if we don't study his books, if we don't discuss his books, how will we have his association? And we want his association. A householder devotee in England told me that he was concerned about his son. Not only his son, but also many other members of the congregation, because his son was focused only on his immediate authority in Krishna consciousness, whom he accepted as his guru. The devotee was concerned that his son should also develop his relationship with Srila Prabhupada, understanding that everything in ISKCON, including Prabhupada's disciples, was the result of Prabhupada's mercy. He felt that his son should have a proper, tangible, substantial relationship with Srila Prabhupada. So the father prevailed upon the son to start listening to Srila Prabhupada's tapes and reading Srila Prabhupada's books systematically. And that boy started to awaken his relationship with Srila Prabhupada in a very tangible way. He hadn't understood it before. He hadn't understood that he could have a real, substantial, tangible relationship with Srila Prabhupada, even in Prabhupada's physical separation, by hearing his words, reading his books. And then Srila Prabhupada started to come in his dreams. The boy is very pure. In his teens, he went to Vrindavan and joined the 24-hour kirtan party and was ready to live the rest of his life in Vrindavan, just chanting the holy names. In particular, he was a very good mridanga player. So he had a dream in which the deity of Srila Prabhupada sitting on his Vyasasana in Vrindavan came to life. Many devotees have had dreams in which the deity of Srila Prabhupada comes to life. And he had another dream in which Srila Prabhupada was standing at the entrance to the temple room at Bhaktivedanta Manor, observing all the youth, including him, during kirtan. After the kirtan, Srila Prabhupada walked over to him in his dream and said, "It is very good that you are engaged in kirtan. However, if one does kirtan simply to attract the opposite sex, this kind of kirtan will take one to the darkest regions of hell." The boy took the dream as real and took the instruction to heart. And of course, what Srila Prabhupada said is true. This is just one example of how we can establish our relationship with Srila Prabhupada or any of the previous acharyas through Vani, through hearing the words, through reading the books. Srila Prabhupada would take rest at about 10 o'clock at night and then wake up at about midnight and translate. While practically everyone else was sleeping, he was translating for us. He was translating so that we would have these books to study and apply. So it is our duty, it is our privilege, it is a blessing, but it is also our duty to read the books. Otherwise, it means that Srila Prabhupada was wasting his time writing books for us, and we don't even care enough to reciprocate and make the effort to study them. Srila Prabhupada said that we should not only distribute his books, but also read them. He said of his devotees that Sankirtan will keep them happy, and reading his books will keep them. So now we shall continue reading with the concluding words. In this connection, we may call to memory the time when I was fortunate enough to meet His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada, sometime in the year 1922. Srila Prabhupada had come to Calcutta from Sridham Mayapur to start the missionary activities of the Gaudiya Math. He was sitting in a house at Altadanga when, through the inducement of an intimate friend, the late Sriman Narendranath Malik, I had the opportunity to meet His Divine Grace for the first time. I do not remember the actual date of the meeting, but at that time I was one of the managers of Dr. Bose's laboratory in Calcutta. I was a newly married young man, addicted to Gandhi's movement, and dressed in khadi. Fortunately, even at our first meeting, His Divine Grace advised me to preach the cult of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in English in the Western countries. Because at that time I was a complete nationalist, a follower of Mahatma Gandhi's, I submitted to His Divine Grace that unless our country were free from foreign subjugation, no one would hear the message of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu seriously. Of course, we had some argument on the subject, but at last I was defeated and convinced that Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's message is the only panacea for suffering humanity. I was also convinced that the message of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was then in the hands of a very expert devotee, and that surely the message of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu would spread all over the world. I could not, however, immediately take up his instruction to preach, but I took his words very seriously and was always thinking of how to execute his order, although I was quite unfit to do so. So Srila Prabhupada was the leader of his circle of friends. And thus when Narendranath Malik met Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he wanted our Srila Prabhupada also to meet him, to give his verdict about him. Srila Prabhupada also described how across from his home in Calcutta, there was a large building with many rooms and many men living there. During the day, they would go out and earn money, and then in the evening, they would come back and cook and eat their dinner and go to sleep. And then the next morning, they would go out again to earn money and come back in the evening. Among them, there was one man who, before going out each morning, would put on the robes of a sadhu and go out and collect money and later come back, take off his robes and eat with the other karmis, go to sleep, get up in the morning and go out again. Many sadhus would come to Srila Prabhupada's father's home, and Prabhupada was not very satisfied with their dealings. So when his friend invited him to meet the sadhu, he was not very eager to go, because as there were so many bogus sadhus who were cheating innocent people, he thought that this might be another one. He didn't want to go. But his friend insisted, and ultimately Srila Prabhupada relented and went and met his eternal spiritual master, His Divine Grace Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. When Srila Prabhupada arrived, Srila Saraswati Thakur was sitting on a raised platform, maybe on a cot that was set up as an asana, and everyone else was sitting down. There were some other seats, and Srila Prabhupada sat on one. And from the very first meeting, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur ordered him to preach the message of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in the English language throughout the world. As a nationalist and a follower of Mahatma Gandhi, Srila Prabhupada argued, who will listen to India's message, to Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's message, when India is still under foreign subjugation? Even uncivilized countries like Japan have political independence. First, India should gain political independence, and then people will be ready to hear the message. But Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur did not accept his argument. He said, the message of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is transcendental. It will act independent of factors such as political independence or dependence. And the world needs the knowledge now. We cannot wait for India's independence. We must present the message now. And Srila Prabhupada said that he was defeated in argument by his Guru Maharaj. He said that he had never been before defeated in any argument, but that he had been defeated by his Guru Maharaj and was happy about it. Srila Prabhupada was newly married and had a small child, and so he could not take up the order of his spiritual master immediately. But he kept the instruction in his heart and was always thinking about how he would be able to take it up. This is an important lesson for us. If due to circumstances we are unable to take up an instruction from the spiritual master, we should always keep the instruction in our heart and think of how we can execute it. Pray to be able to execute it. And wait for the opportune moment when we will be able to do so. I had an interaction with Srila Prabhupada in 1971 in which he enunciated the same principle. We were in Gorakhpur, staying as guests of Sri Hanuman Prasad Podar and the Gita Press, in what had been Mr. Podar's estate, Sri Krishna Niketan. A new issue of Back to Godhead magazine had arrived with an article that I had written. Srila Prabhupada read the article and called for me. I have read your article, he told me. It is very nice. You should write. And he added, you can travel with me and I will personally instruct you how to write. Some days later, one of the senior devotees, Hansaduta, wanted to begin his World Sankirtan party. And he asked Srila Prabhupada if he could bring me along. Srila Prabhupada agreed. I was a little disappointed that I wasn't going to travel with him and get personal instructions on how to write. But I had faith that whatever he did was ultimately the best for all concerned. So I accepted his decision that I go with Hamsaduta. So because he had instructed me to write, I went out and bought pens and lined paper. This was before computers. In India, even typewriters were rare. If you needed a document typed, you had to go to the court and find someone outside the courtroom to type your document. Traveling with Hamsaduta, however, I did not have much time. We had a busy schedule going to Agra and Aligarh. And then Hamsaduta Prabhu got a telegram from Srila Prabhupada. We are planning a big Pandal program in Bombay. Come with party immediately. So we all packed up and came to Bombay. Shamsundar Prabhu was the temple president. We had a meeting to divide up the duties, and he asked me to collect advertisements for the souvenir magazine to raise funds for the Pandal program. I told him that Srila Prabhupada had instructed me to write as my main business. Shamsundar replied, "You can write anytime, but this is a special occasion, a time when you can go into any man's office and ask him to give an advertisement for the souvenir. We need to get advertisements to raise funds for the Pandal. So do this now, and you can take up your writing later." I thought that what he had said made sense, and I also knew that Srila Prabhupada wanted us to cooperate with our authorities, so I agreed. Then, some days later, Srila Prabhupada arrived, and as usual, all the disciples entered his sitting room with him, and he glanced around the room at each disciple, maybe exchanging a few words. When he came to me, he said, "So, Giriraj, how is your writing going?" I was completely flustered. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to speak, but nothing clear was coming out. Srila Prabhupada said, "Okay, we'll discuss later." After a while, he called for me. I was alone in the room with him, and he asked me, "So, what about your writing?" I was in anxiety because I wasn't sure if I had done the right thing. But I explained what Shamsundar had said and how it made sense to me, and how I knew that Srila Prabhupada wanted us to cooperate with our authorities. So I thought I should cooperate. Did I do the right thing?" I asked. He replied, "One can suspend temporarily the order of the spiritual master, but one can never neglect it." And then he gave his own example. Like me, my Guru Maharaj also instructed me to write. But I am so busy traveling in India now, I hardly have time to write. You can suspend the order of the spiritual master, but you can never neglect it. So back to the concluding words. I could not, however, immediately take up his instructions to preach, but I took his words very seriously and was always thinking of how to execute his order, although I was quite unfit to do so. In this way, I passed my life as a householder until 1950, when I retired from family life as a vanaprastha. With no companion, I loitered here and there until 1958, when I took sannyas. Then I was completely ready to discharge the order of my spiritual master. Srila Prabhupada describes how he would have dreams in which his spiritual master, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, would come to him and call him to follow him. Srila Prabhupada would wake up in anxiety because he would think, oh, Guru Maharaj is calling me to follow him. He wants me to preach. He wants me to leave my family. And he was in a panic because he was thinking, how can I leave my family? How can I live alone? Then one of Srila Prabhupada's godbrothers, another disciple of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, His Holiness Bhakti Pragyan Keshav Goswami Maharaj, encouraged him, you should take sannyas. You cannot really take up the order of your spiritual master to preach unless you take sannyas. When that godbrother passed away in 1968, Srila Prabhupada gave a nice talk about him, saying how that godbrother had forced him to take sannyas. Quote, actually, he did not force me to take sannyas, Prabhupada said. My Guru Maharaj forced me to take sannyas through my godbrother. So this is another instruction that a sincere disciple can receive instructions from his spiritual master through others. So back to the concluding words. After he passed away, I started the fortnightly magazine Back to Godhead sometime in 1944 and tried to spread the cult of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu through this magazine. After I took sannyas, a well-wishing friend suggested I write books instead of magazines. Magazines, he said, might be thrown away, but books remain perpetually. So here's another example. Prabhupada took the advice of his friend very seriously because his friend's advice was in support of his spiritual master's instruction. So back to the concluding words. Then I attempted to write Srimad Bhagavatam. Before that, when I was a householder, I had written on Srimad Bhagavad Gita and had completed about 1,100 pages. But somehow or other, the manuscript was stolen. In any case, when I had published Srimad Bhagavatam, first canto in 3 volumes in India, I thought of going to the USA. By the mercy of His divine grace, I was able to come to New York on September 17th, 1965. Since then, I've translated many books, including Srimad Bhagavatam, the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, Teachings of Lord Chaitanya, a summary, and many others. In the meantime, I was induced to translate Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita and publish it in an elaborate version. In his leisure time and later life, His Divine Grace Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur would simply read Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita. It was his favorite book. He used to say that there would be a time when foreigners would learn the Bengali language to read Chaitanya Charitamrita. The work on this translation began about 18 months ago. Now, by the grace of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and His Divine Grace Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, it is finished. In this connection, I have to thank my disciples, especially Srimad Pradumya Das Adhikari, Srimad Nitai Das Adhikari, Sriman Jayadvaita Das Brahmachari, and many other boys and girls who are sincerely helping me in writing, editing, and publishing all these literatures. So you can see Srila Prabhupada really doesn't take any credit for himself. He gives the credit to his Guru Maharaj, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, and here he's giving credit to his disciples who helped him in preparing the Chaitanya Charitamrita. Srila Prabhupada translated 17 volumes in 18 months. That's one volume a month. No one can do that. No ordinary human being can do that. And while it was happening, he was chiding us like anything for not bringing out the books. He had the manuscripts ready, but the books were not being published. So he told Rameshwar Prabhu, who was head of the BBT in Los Angeles, that he wanted all the volumes published in 4 months. Maybe only 2 or 3 had been published, so there were 14 volumes left. Using material calculation, Rameshwar said, "It is impossible." Srila Prabhupada replied, "Impossible is a word in a fool's dictionary." Then Rameshwar said, "Well, what if we can't do it?" And Srila Prabhupada replied, "Disqualified." In other words, if you can't do it, you're not qualified to be in charge of the BBT, and we will have to find someone else. So they surrendered to the order. It is said that when the spiritual master gives an instruction, the power to execute that instruction comes with it. And the devotees totally surrendered to the instruction. They reorganized the BBT and were working day and night, hardly eating or sleeping, and they did it. Srila Prabhupada could do things that no human being could do, and he gave us instructions that were beyond our capacity. But if we surrendered to his instructions and tried our best, sincerely and with intelligence, we could do things that had seemed impossible. So now we come to the penultimate paragraph, that means the second to the last paragraph of the concluding words. And this is revolutionary. So please listen, my dear devotees, with rapt attention. Quote, "I think that His Divine Grace, Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, is always seeing my activities and guiding me within my heart by his words. As it is said in Srimad Bhagavatam, Tene Brahma Hridaya Adi Kavaye. That's 1:1. Spiritual inspiration comes from within the heart, wherein the Supreme Personality of Godhead and his Paramatma feature is always sitting with all his devotees and associates. So we all accept that Krishna is in the heart. It is a basic instruction in the Bhagavad Gita. Sarvasya chaham hridi sannivisto. But here Srila Prabhupada says that his translation of Sri Chaitanya by Charitamrita was guided by his spiritual master within the heart. Now, of course, Srila Prabhupada received the instruction to write in English from Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur and kept that instruction in his heart. But here, Prabhupada seems to be saying more that Srila Prabhupada was actually sitting in his heart as one of the associates of the Super Soul. And from within the heart, he could give active, dynamic guidance. This subject is discussed in the fourth canto of Srimad Bhagavatam in relation to the disappearance of the spiritual master. It is actually a metaphor that a king and his wife entered the Vanaprastha ashram and went into the forest, and the king died, leaving his widow alone. Figuratively, the king is the spiritual master and the widow is the disciple. After the king died, an old friend came to the widow, and this old friend, who came in the form of a Brahmin, is considered to be the supersoul, or a representative of the supersoul. So there's a lot of discussion how one can get guidance from the spiritual master after the disappearance of the spiritual master. The widow was ready to enter into the fire, sati, and Srila Prabhupada explains that this means that the disciple should be ready to lay down his life for the mission of the spiritual master. When the disciple is ready to take up the order of the spiritual master or the mission of the spiritual master without any consideration of personal gain or loss, he is ready to lay down his life to execute the order of the spiritual master. He would rather die than fail to execute the order of the spiritual master. At that time, the spiritual master appears to the disciple to give him instruction. So back to the concluding words. It is to be admitted that whatever translation work I have done is through the inspiration of my spiritual master. Because personally, I am most insignificant and incompetent to do this materially impossible work. There was another time when Srila Prabhupada was being interviewed by a newspaper reporter in America after having published so many books in such a short time. And he said that actually he hadn't written the books, but Krishna had written them. The newspaper reporter was a little confused about what that meant. And one of Prabhupada's disciples explained that Prabhupada had meant that Krishna had given him the intelligence to write the books. But Srila Prabhupada said, no, Krishna wrote directly. And Prabhupada would read his own books. Any ordinary author, when he writes a book, that's the end of it. He doesn't read the book he just wrote, and he'll go on to the next book. But Srila Prabhupada would read his own books. What author reads his own books? Only if the subject is transcendental will an author read his own books. Shruti Kirti Prabhu went into Srila Prabhupada's room one day when Prabhupada was reading Krishna book. These books are so wonderful, Prabhupada said. If you just read this book, Krishna, you can become completely Krishna conscious. Then he said, not even the whole book. If you read just one chapter, you can become completely Krishna conscious. And then he said, not even one chapter. If you read one page, you can become completely Krishna conscious. Not even a page. If you read just one paragraph, you can become completely Krishna conscious. Not even a paragraph. If you read just one sentence, you can become completely Krishna conscious. Not even a full sentence. If you read just one word, you can become completely Krishna conscious. Because these books are Krishna. They are written by Krishna or Krishna's pure devotee, and they are Krishna. You're associating with Krishna. By associating with Krishna, you can become fully Krishna conscious, which is what we are meant to do. So back to the concluding words. It is to be admitted that whatever translation work I have done is through the inspiration of my spiritual master. Because personally, I am most insignificant and incompetent to do this materially impossible work. I do not think myself a very learned scholar, but I have full faith in the service of my spiritual master, His Divine Grace, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. If there is any credit to my activities of translating, it is all due to His Divine Grace. So Prabhupada is not taking any credit for himself. He's giving all credit to his spiritual master. So back to the concluding words. Certainly, if His Divine Grace were physically present at this time, it would have been a great occasion for jubilation. But even though He is not physically present, I am confident that He is very much pleased by this work of translation. He was very fond of seeing many books published to spread the Krishna consciousness movement. Therefore, our society, the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, has been formed to execute the order of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and His Divine Grace, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. So now we come back to the theme of the order of the spiritual master. Srila Prabhupada began by saying that he translated Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita under the authorized instruction of his spiritual master. Now he is saying that he formed the International Society for Krishna Consciousness to execute the order of the spiritual master and Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. What order? The order to print and distribute books. There are other orders, of course, but specifically, Prabhupada is focusing on the order to print and distribute books. Back to the concluding words. It is my wish that devotees of Lord Chaitanya all over the world enjoy this translation. Again, we shouldn't just distribute the books. We should read them. We should relish them. We should enjoy them. We should make ourselves one with them. Go back to the concluding words. And I am glad to express my gratitude to the learned men in the Western countries who are so pleased with my work that they are ordering in advance all my books that will be published in the future. On this occasion, therefore, I request my disciples who are determined to help me in this work, and we are all Prabhupada's disciples, some Shiksha disciples, some Diksha disciples. On this occasion, therefore, I request my disciples who are determined to help me in this work to continue their cooperation fully, so that philosophers, scholars, religionists, and people in general all over the world will benefit by reading our transcendental literatures, such as Srimad Bhagavatam and Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita. Thus end the Bhaktivedanta purports to Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, dated November 10th, 1974, at the Bhaktivedanta Book Trust, Hare Krishna Land, Juhu, Bombay. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai, Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita Ki Jai. So, my dear devotees, thank you for joining us for this program on this auspicious occasion. And now, if any of you have any reflections that you would like to share or any questions that you would like to ask, you can raise your hands, your physical hands or your virtual hands. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna. Jai.
Hare Krishna, dear devotees, you're most welcome to just unmute yourself and ask any questions.
Oh, there's a hand.
Yeah, Madhur Amrita Mataji, please go ahead.
Hare Krishna.
Madhuri Amrita. Dasi.
Hare Krishna. Thank you for a very beautiful. My question was regarding to understand when you were talking just now about how Prabhupada was referring to his spiritual master being in his heart as well as Krishna. So I was thinking, can you hold on for a second? When we are in the temple and we see the Murti of Srila Prabhupada, and we know that Prabhupada's there, how do we understand it logically that Prabhupada's actually there in the Murti?
On the absolute platform, well, let's start with the relative platform. On the relative platform, we can take the name. The name of a thing and the thing are different. So if I'm thirsty and I chant water, 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 just chanting water, water won't quench my thirst because the word water and the substance water are different. But if I chant Krishna, Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna is actually present, dancing on my tongue. Because the name Krishna and Krishna himself are the same. So the same applies to the deity. Krishna and his name, his form, his qualities, his paraphernalia, and his entourage are all Krishna. And Srila Prabhupada is part of Krishna's entourage. Srila Prabhupada is one of Krishna's associates. So he's also part of that same absolute realm, and therefore the deity is not different from him. And after Srila Prabhupada left, I mean, of course we can experience it in many ways, but after Prabhupada left, on the occasion of Gopastami, which is coming up fairly soon in Kartik, we took Srila Prabhupada's deity. I mean, it was just after he left. We didn't have these big life-size deities that Lochan Prabhu makes, but there was a small brass deity of Srila Prabhupada. And it was one of Srila Prabhupada's last desires to go to Govardhan Hill. And, he didn't go, he wasn't well enough. But after he left, we wanted to fulfill his desire. So he took that deity on Parikrama of Govardhan Hill. And when we got to Radhakund and Shamakund, there's a place in the middle. It's called the Sangam. There's and there's like a shrine, and there's a lot of Govardhan Shilas there. And so the devotees took that deity of Srila Prabhupada onto the Sangam. And somehow, I mean, we have the theoretical understanding, but somehow I actually experienced, I actually felt it, I actually experienced that the deity of Srila Prabhupada was Srila Prabhupada, that Srila Prabhupada was right there still. So that was a very beautiful moment. So yes, we should not doubt that Srila Prabhupada and his deity, that Srila Prabhupada is present as his deity. But again, it's a matter of consciousness. You know, Srila Prabhupada said about Krishna deity, that, you know, if you treat the deity as Krishna, Krishna will talk with you. But if you treat the deity as stone, then it will remain as stone for you. So I'm sure Srila Prabhupada will speak to you.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna. Any other questions or comments?
Hare Krishna Maharaj.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, please accept my humble obeisances.
Jai.
Thank you so much for the wonderful class. Just yesterday, I was reading the first canto, and I underlined a few things because I had a few questions as I was reading this, and I was wondering if I will be able to get some enlightenment on this. So I'm so glad that I have the opportunity to ask you now.
Okay.
So this is first canto, chapter 6, conversation between Narada and Vyasadeva. And this is the end. It's the second last text. So I'll just say the translation. So Sudha Goswami says that thus addressing Vyasadeva, Srila. So first canto, chapter 6, text 37.
I'm actually listening to Srila Prabhupada's lectures on this section now. So yes, I'm with you.
Yes. So in the last half of the purport, Prabhupada writes, similarly, the transcendental system of devotional service is also free. It may or may not develop in a particular person even after he undergoes all the detailed formulas. Similarly, the association of the devotee is also free. One may be fortunate to have it, or one may not have it, even after thousands of endeavors. Therefore, in all spheres of devotional service, freedom is the main pivot. Without freedom, there is no execution of devotional service. The freedom surrendered to the Lord does not mean that the devotee becomes dependent in every respect. So I was just, I spent quite some time thinking about this, that because I feel that Prabhupada, when he's writing here that the transcendental system of devotional service is also free, like I feel that he's not referring to it in terms of price. And then he also says that the freedom surrendered to the Lord does not mean that the devotee becomes dependent in every respect. So like what I understood was that Prabhupada is saying is that the Lord is free to give devotional service, that he is under no obligation.
Yes.
Okay. So I was wondering if you could just please explain this a little bit.
Well, I was going to say the same thing, that on the absolute platform, devotional service is Krishna. The association of devotees is Krishna. And Krishna is free. He's independent.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, we can get devotional service only by mercy.
Mm-hmm.
Can't claim any right to it. We can get the association of devotees only by mercy.
Mm-hmm.
Cannot claim any right to it. So, yeah, we're completely dependent on mercy. But at the same time, we also make our endeavor, as we learn from the Damodar Lila that we are celebrating this month. When Mother Yashoda tried to bind Lord Krishna, the rope was always 2 fingers too short. But then eventually, Krishna, feeling compassionate for his mother, for her sincere effort, allowed himself to be bound by her. And there are 2 words in the Sanskrit, parishram, which means endeavor or hard labor, and the other is Krishna Kripa, which means Krishna's mercy. And the Acharyas, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, Srila Jiva Goswami, explain that the distance of the 2 fingers is covered. 1 finger is covered by parishram, by our endeavor, and the other finger is covered by Krishna Kripa, Krishna's mercy. And by that combination, Krishna can be bound. So we do make an effort, but our effort alone is not sufficient. Our effort can be successful only with Krishna's mercy. And, but yeah, this is one of my favorite verses and purports. Devotional service is free. And this word, the word in Sanskrit, yadrichiko, that word yadrichaya is a very special word. And, sometimes it's translated as somehow or other, but the purport is that it's free, it's independent. So, yeah, I mean, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur gives a very beautiful explanation of how one gets bhakti in his book Madhurya Kadambini. And he says someone could say that one gets bhakti by the mercy of Krishna, but that cannot be the case because Krishna he's the father of every living entity. He has to be equal to every living entity. So if we say that the cause of bhakti is Krishna's mercy, it cannot be correct because he would have to give bhakti to everyone because everyone is equally his part and parcel. And then he says one could say that the cause of a person receiving bhakti is the mercy of a devotee. But one could also argue that a devotee also should be equal to everyone. But if we look at the description of the devotee, the Madhyama Bhagavat, given in Srimad Bhagavatam, we find that the Madhyam Bhagavata does make distinctions. And it said, Prema Maitri Kripopeksha Sakaroti Samadhyama. So Prema, he gives his love to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Maitri, he makes friendship with devotees. Kripa, he gives mercy to the innocent. And Upeksha, he neglects the envious. So he gives mercy to the innocent. And then when the devotee gives mercy, Krishna gives mercy. Because Krishna is Bhaktavatsala. He's very, he's he's partial to his devotees. He's affectionate to his devotees. So when the devotee gives mercy, then Krishna follows the devotee's mercy with his mercy. So, yeah.
Thank you so much for that. And could you also please explain what that line means? The freedom surrendered to the Lord does not mean that the devotee becomes dependent in every respect.
Well, I'll give an example from my own experience in Boston. I joined the Boston Temple in 1969. So my responsibility was to lock up the temple. It was just a small storefront, 95 Glenville Avenue. So my responsibility was to lock up the temple when we went on Sankirtan. So we were in the vehicle heading out on Sankirtan, and I realized that I'd forgotten to lock the temple. So I asked Satsvarupa Prabhu, who was the temple president, what to do. I said, I forgot to lock the temple. Maybe, maybe we should just depend on Krishna. And Satsvarupa Prabhu replied, that's too much dependence on Krishna. That kind of dependence comes to taking service from Krishna, because we weren't conscientious and diligent and we didn't lock the temple. So we have to take service from Krishna, that Krishna will protect the temple property. So, yeah, I think that's how I would apply that understanding to that statement. Yeah, I mean, in a way we're dependent, but I mean, the freedom surrendered to the Lord does not mean that the devotee becomes dependent in every respect. Another thought that comes to mind is a purport in the Bhagavad Gita in which Srila Prabhupada writes that everything is prompted by the super soul within and confirmed by the spiritual master without. Yeah. I'm glad you're reading so seriously and carefully.
Thank you so much.
Hare Krishna. Thank you. Chantal has raised her hand.
Hare Krishna, Guru Maharaj.
Hare Krishna.
Yes, it my since it's authorized to say fine. Guru Maharaj, my question is that in the concluding words we just read, there is a sentence which is physical presence is sometimes appreciable and sometimes not. But Vani continues to exist eternally. Therefore, we must take advantage of the Vani, not the physical presence. So I was wondering that in what conditions do we say that physical presence is not appreciable? And the second part of my question is that should I disciple, like we know that the Vani association is more important than the Vapu association. So should a disciple be hankering over his or her spiritual master's physical association? And if yes, then how much?
Well, yes, when Srila Prabhupada says physical presence may be appreciable or not, he means that the physical body may or may not be there. Just like when he wrote the concluding words, his spiritual master was not physically present. And now Srila Prabhupada himself is not physically present. So in that sense, but we have to understand Srila Prabhupada's statements in the context of all of his statements. So when Srila Prabhupada writes, we should take care of the Vani, not the Vapu, it's not an absolute statement, not the Vapu, because elsewhere in the fourth canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, Srila Prabhupada explains that that as long as the spiritual master is physically present, one should serve the physical body of the spiritual master. And then when he is no longer physically existing, one should serve his body, his instructions. And so far as, wanting the personal association of the spiritual master, well, yeah, of course. Of course we do. I was dutiful, so generally I wouldn't leave my service to go and be with Srila Prabhupada, but I know some devotees, they would just do anything to get Srila Prabhupada's physical association. And in the end, when Srila Prabhupada was in his last months in Vrindavan, I went to stay with him. We were getting close to the opening of the Juhu temple. And Gopal Krishna Maharaj, who was the GBC for Bombay, wanted me to come back. I was sort of torn. I didn't know what to do. So I asked Tamal Krishna Goswami, but he wouldn't answer. And I asked Jagadish Prabhu, and he sort of analyzed the pros and cons of the different choices, but he didn't give a final conclusion. He left it to me to come to the final conclusion. So it was a real dilemma. But I don't know, somehow I searched within myself and I came to the conclusion I should stay with Srila Prabhupada. And I'm happy that I did decide to stay there with him in Vrindavan. I do not at all regret that decision. And I learned so much by spending time with him. There was it seemed, yeah, you can learn a lot from a physical presence. Once I and I don't know if I need to explain the whole context of it, but there was a in the Jewish tradition, they have an institution called the yeshiva, which literally translated means academy. And in the yeshiva, the students study from the rabbi. And so one of the students at the yeshiva wanted to do personal service, He wanted to stay with the rabbi and do personal service to the rabbi. So one of the other students asked him why. And the first student replied, I want to see how he ties his shoelaces. And of course, it's not that he really wanted to learn how to tie his shoelaces, but the idea was that by, observing the behavior of a spiritually elevated person, one learns so many things. So I think that was the purport. And, from that perspective, one can want to, have the physical presence of the spiritual master. And also, it's a principle that that when you serve someone, you get the qualities of the person. And of course, you can serve Vani or Vapu. But I remember when His Holiness Naranjan Swami came to stay with me at my ashram here in Carpinteria, California. I was very happy because, of course, he has so many good qualities, but specifically at that time, I was thinking of his taste for the holy name. I thought, oh, this is very good. I can serve him, and by serving him, I'll increase my taste for the holy name.
Yes, Giriraj.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I understand.
So I see Nanda Vraj, I think his hand was up first, and then Dharma Setu Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, then Pranam. Maharaj, sometimes a disciple may not get a specific instruction if it is something very general. So in that circumstances, what should a disciple do?
You mean when you're in, do you mean what should you do in terms of your general service, or what should you do in a specific incident when you're not clear what the spiritual master would want you to do?
Yes, there is no specific instruction like, distribute my books or do this project, but the general instruction, just do your sadhana properly. So once a disciple doesn't receive a specific instruction, what sort of moods a disciple should have?
And is this a situation in which you cannot directly ask the spiritual master?
No, suppose the spiritual master is no longer physically present.
Yeah. So in that case, it may sound surprising, may not, may sound surprising. But a couple of times Srila Prabhupada was asked that question. One time, Satsvarupa Das Goswami asked Srila Prabhupada that now you're here, so we can ask you our questions, but what about in the future when you're not here? How will we get the answers? And Srila Prabhupada replied, the holy name of Krishna and Krishna himself are the same. Do you realize this fact? And there were other incidents also in which Srila Prabhupada gave the answer that by offenseless chanting of the holy name, we can get answers to our questions. And then the other point I would make is to consult, especially, you could say, senior disciples of the same spiritual master, what they believe that your spiritual master would want you to do. And then again, it's a general rule to do what our authorities ask. I mean, I don't know what your situation is, but you could always ask the GBC, the temple president, the temple commander, what they would like you to do.
Thank you very much. Guidance.
Thank you. Hare Krishna. So Dharma Setu Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. Thank you very much for a wonderful class. It's very inspiring and enlivening. Thank you very much. Well, actually, your answer to the last question has given me an answer to the question that I was going to ask you, but I think I'll ask my question anyway. And that was that you mentioned how sometimes one may suspend, Srila Prabhupada said, one may suspend the instruction of the spiritual master, but it should never be given up. I was wondering, what is the process for knowing and understanding how to not suspend the instruction of the spiritual master?
Oh, well, we don't want to suspend it, but sometimes the circumstances are such that we have to suspend it. Like Srila Prabhupada instructed me to write as my first business. I didn't want to suspend it, but when I got to Bombay and Shamsundar Prabhu said, you know, this is the one time you can just walk into any man's office and ask for an ad, and you know, you can write any time. So the combination of the logic of what he said and the fact that Srila Prabhupada wanted us to cooperate with our authorities convinced me that I should, so to speak, suspend the order to write. And then, you know, when Srila Prabhupada came, he said, so Giriraj, how's your writing going? And I didn't know what to say. And Prabhupada said, all right, we'll speak later. And then he called for me a little later, and then he made that statement that, you know, one can temporarily suspend the order of the spiritual master, but one can never neglect it. So we have to keep that, we should always keep the instruction in our heart and wait for the opportunity, or even pray for the opportunity to be able to execute it. And as Srila Prabhupada writes in his concluding words, he felt himself unfit. So that cannot be an excuse that I'm not fit to follow the instruction. And also it said that, you know, when the spiritual master gives an instruction, he also gives the potency to execute it. So that cannot be an excuse for suspending the order. Although it could be that one, but that wouldn't really be suspending the order. I was going to say it could be that one has to develop some skills in order to execute it properly, but that's part of executing it. It's not exactly suspending it. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good question.
Is there any other question or comments, or we can conclude here? So we'll request Her Grace Bhavasandi Mataji to please come forward and just pass the vote of thanks to Maharaj. Bhavasandi Mataji.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, just on behalf of ISON Auckland and all the devotees watching in New Zealand and across the world, I just wanted to say such a sincere thank you for your deep realizations and guiding us closer to Srila Prabhupada and service to our spiritual masters through your class today. And yeah, hoping for more of your association in the near future. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Thank you. Hare Krishna. So if we're going to end now, I suggest we conclude with Vaishnava Pranam. Let us offer our respectful obeisances unto all the Vaishnava devotees of the Lord, who are just like desire trees who can fulfill the desires of everyone and are full of compassion for the fallen conditioned souls. Vanchakalpa trubhyascha kripa sindhubhyevacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Anantakoti Vaishnavrinda ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Shri
His
Chaitanya-
Holiness Giriraj Swami Maharaj ki jai.
Jai.
Srila Prabhupada ki
Thank you
jai.
so much.
Jai.
So we'll conclude here, everyone. Thank you so much for joining, and